My name is Vicki Clark. I'm the supervisor here in the Heritage Room, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight to our John H. Ames reading series. For those of you who might not have visited our collection recently, I'd like to tell you what we are all about up here. The Heritage Room is dedicated to preserving and promoting Nebraska's authors. And in our room over here we have over 8,000 volumes, which represent over 2,000 different authors, which is something to be very proud of here in our state. The Heritage Room is supported by an endowment fund which was established through the volunteer efforts of the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association in association with the Lincoln City Library Foundation. And I would like to encourage any of you to come up and visit our collection and our works. We have, besides books, we have photographs and manuscripts, lots of vertical files of clippings of materials about authors. So if you're doing research about anybody, we can sure give you lots of information. We also have a database we're working on about these authors as well. So we encourage you to come up sometime during our public service hours, and we'd love to show you more about our collection up here. But tonight what we'd like to focus on is the works and the life of Mignon Eberhart, who was a Nebraska mystery writer. I'm not going to say a lot of things about her because we've got some people who know a lot more than I do about that tonight. So I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. We have Barbara Rix and Lila McVay. And Barbara will speak first tonight about the biographical information about Mignon Eberhart. Barbara was raised in Dayton, Ohio, and she attended Ohio Wesleyan University and was a member of the Ohio chapter of Alpha Gamma Delta sorority. And something that's interesting about that is Mignon Eberhart also belonged to Alpha Gamma Delta sorority. She's lived in Lincoln for 25 years and was a longtime employee of Lincoln City Libraries. She's worked in the Interlibrary Loan Department, Cataloging Department, Youth Services, and the Reference Department. And there's an interesting little tale that she can tell you that associates that to Lincoln City Libraries with Eberhart as well. Barbara began reading Eberhart's books because everyone kept talking about them, and she was just curious to find out what it was all about. And so in turn, she hopes to instill some of that curiosity in you tonight, too, to read more about Eberhart. Lila McVay is a native of Nebraska. She was born in Geneva, and she currently lives in David City. She also attended Nebraska Wesleyan, as Eberhart did, and too was a member of Alpha Gamma Delta sorority, so we really have a sisterhood here tonight. She is I have to mention, several years after Eberhart did as well. They weren't sisters at the same time. She is a member of the Owls Club, which began in 1898 and is unique to David City. And it's a literary club for women in which they present informative papers and book reviews on a wide range of topics. An interesting thing about the Owls Club is they review a story from the very beginning to the very end, but she assured us tonight she's not going to give away the mysteries tonight, so you'll have to read the books for yourself. So Lila will be reviewing Eberhart's books tonight. So with that, let's welcome Barbara.
When I worked at the reference desk, several people approached me at different times and said they could not find a mystery book in the library that they had not read before. And I suggested Mignon Eberhart's books, and they had not heard of her, and they were surprised to hear that she was a Lincoln native. Bison book editor Jay Foltz worked to get Mignon Eberhart's books republished. Two books, The Patient in Room 18 and While the Patient Slept, were reprinted this year and helped to rekindle interest in her books. Two more of her books will be reprinted by Bison Books next year. They're on the table back there that you can look at. Mignon Eberhart was born July 6, 1899. She celebrated her 96th birthday this year. She's the daughter of William Thomas Good and Margaret Hill Bruffy Good. Her Scotch and English ancestors settled in Virginia in the early 1700s. Other ancestors settled later in Illinois and West Virginia. They moved to Nebraska after the Civil War, before Nebraska was a state. Her great-aunt Sue's last purchase in Virginia was a bonnet for $65 Confederate money, and she paid $1 to have it perfumed, because if she was going to be scalped, she wanted to be scalped in style. Mignon's parents moved from a farm near Ceresco to University Place in 1892. For 45 years, Bill Good owned the ice plant at 3601 North 48th Street. and he delivered ice by horse-drawn wagons to businesses, residences, and railroad cars. Every business in Lincoln closed for his funeral in 1937. Margaret, his wife, liked storytelling. She remained in the family home until her death in 1958. The family home still stands in University Place, and Mignon's parents are buried in Wyuka Cemetery. Minion had an older sister, Lulu, that was 10 years older. Lulu Goodvogelsang was a member of Nebraska Wesleyan Board of Trustees and the International Alumni President of her sorority, Alpha Gamma Delta. Lulu passed away in 1962. Minion attended the Lincoln Public Schools and thought about becoming a painter, musician, or a librarian. She enjoyed writing stories at age 10 and liked to read. In high school, she traded work on English compositions for solutions to geometry problems. Minion has always been very shy. She talks very rapidly, her thoughts ahead of her words, so she often backs up and starts over again. She enrolled in Nebraska Wesleyan in 1917 and attended classes for 3 years. According to school records, she majored in English and history. Classmates remembered her as being shy, modest, and the youngest girl in their class. She quit college without a degree and apprenticed under Lulu Horn at the Lincoln City Library. But she soon decided that cataloging books was not what she wanted to do. She married Allinson C. Eberhart, a civil engineer with a degree from the University of Nebraska, on December 29, 1923. Minion soon began writing short mystery stories. Her first novelette, The Dark Corridor, was first published in Flynn's magazine on December 5, 1925. Flynn's magazine was a detective story weekly. A few months later, Flynn's magazine published the second novelette of Mrs. Eberhardt, The E String. She then wrote several short stories. Some of them were published in a boys' magazine. Minion wrote to keep busy while her husband built bridges and dams in the West and along the coast, the Pacific coast. Her first 3 books were set in Nebraska. The first book, The Patient in Room 18, was published in 1929 by Doubleday, Doran and Company in New York. Nurse Sarah Keat and Detective Lance O'Leary are introduced in this first novel. Sarah is a middle-aged spinster nurse that is very inquisitive, has a sense of humor, and she's always finding herself in dangerous situations. She has red hair and a sharp tongue. She appears also in the books While the Patient Slept, The Mystery of Hunting's End, From This Dark Stairway, Murder by an Aristocrat, Wolf in Man's Clothing, and Man Missing. At one point, she becomes a little younger and her name changes to Sally Keating. Actresses that played her role in films were Eileen McMahon, Jane Darwell, Ann Sheridan, and Kay Lineker. The Nurse Keat movies were While the Patient Slept in 1935, The Murder of Dr. Harrigan in 1936, which was based on the book From This Dark Stairway, Murder by an Aristocrat in 1936, The Great Hospital Mystery in 1937, The Patient in Room 18 in 1938, and Mystery House in 1938 also, and it was based on the mystery of Hunting's End. Another movie, The White Cockatoo, from the book with the same name, did not have Nurse Keat as a character. It is about an American orphan living in a French hotel. She is waiting for her brother to arrive with the family inheritance. She is not aware that the hotel owners plan to kill her and substitute another girl in her place. Three's a Crowd, filmed in 1945, was based on the book Hasty Wedding. Minion and her husband were vacationing in France when the Depression hit, and there were no more jobs for her husband. They rented a room in a hotel in Nice, where she wrote her second novel, While the Patient Slept. This book launched her writing career. It received the Scotland Yard Prize in 1931, and the $5,000 helped their financial situation during the Depression. Minion never started a book with a puzzle already solved in her mind. She let it evolve. She was at her desk each morning at 9 a.m. and stayed until she felt done for the day. She then showed her work each day to her husband for his technical advice. Her husband never criticized the content of the stories, and she never found fault with his bridges. Alan died in 1978. She saved Saturday and Sunday for housekeeping and writing letters. She has also written books on trains, steamships, and airplanes. She does not believe that one must experience what one writes about. She does not want murder in her private life, and she does not like scary situations. Her mysteries have been printed and reprinted, translated into numerous languages. They have been selected by book clubs, and there are many paperback editions. She wrote a play for Broadway called 8 O'Clock Tuesday. It closed in 2 weeks, so was a disappointment to her. The Mystery of Hunting's End was adapted for the stage in 1933 by Enid Miller, who was the head of Nebraska Wesleyan Speech Department, and it was later produced at Nebraska Wesleyan. In real life, she says she is a poor detective because she never knows what her neighbors are doing. She enjoyed travel to exotic locations to get background material for her books. Her descriptions of locations are so vivid that a reader certainly gets the feelings of the place. She pays attention to all the details of local color. In the book Crime and Mystery Writers, it is stated that Eberhardt's novels are set in a world replete with mystery at the outset, so that the hero and the readers are catapulted into an environment which is strange and vaguely threatening. The novels are told from a female character's point of view, except in one book, Another Man's Murder, which she wrote in 1957. Minion went to her attorney for advice on the legal problems in her stories. She also went to her doctor and a chemist for advice. In a newspaper article in the Lincoln Star on March 2, 1951, staff writer Joe Visoba quotes Minion as saying that her characters are fictional, or they're composites of people she knows. When starting a book, she writes about 1,500 words on each character, then throws it away and finds that each character is either firmly formed or else so weak it is abandoned. Minion said, "The nice thing about writing mystery stories is that if a character gets out of hand, you can always get rid of him." Minion felt that in her mysteries and the mysteries of other writers, a good policeman could probably solve the crimes in 5 minutes. She has lived in many places besides Lincoln and the sand hills of Nebraska and East France. She has lived, the best known in her books are the Florida orange groves, New York City, New Jersey, Chicago, Oak Park, Illinois, France, and Westport, Connecticut. She currently lives in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is near the famous Writers' School, where she was a director and teacher. On her book jackets, she has been photographed with her pets. Her first photograph is with a large white poodle, then a medium black poodle, and Siamese cats. A Kerry Blue Terrier from New Jersey, Skipper, was in the book, Hunt with the Hounds. Minion gave him to the M.C. Mayo family at 4919 Baldwin because there was no place for him in her apartment in Chicago. She now lives alone with a large dog. She was awarded an honorary doctorate degree from Nebraska Wesleyan in 1935. In 1971, she was awarded the Grand Master Award, the highest award given by mystery writers of America and presented only to individuals who, by a lifetime achievement, have proven themselves preeminent in the craft of the mystery. She also served as president of this organization. In 1994, She received the Malice Domestic Lifetime Achievement Award. Her sorority also awarded her the Distinguished Citizen Award. Many book reviewers believe that Minion's best works are those that combine the elements of a Gothic romance with the elements of a classic mystery. Her love of history shows in the Civil War mysteries The Cup, the Blade, or The Gun in 1961, and Family Fortune in 1976. Enemy in the House in 1962 is set during the American Revolution. There are 3 Second World War novels: The Man Next Door in 1943, Wings of Fear in 1945, and 5 Passengers from Lisbon in 1946. Eberhardt believes in women's rights and demands for equality. She also believes in the institution of marriage and that it should be forever. Most credit Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Murders in Rue Morgue, published in April 1841, as the beginning of the detective story as we know it today. The profession of detective was invented around the same time, so there couldn't have been detective stories before then. The novel, The Leavenworth Case, published in 1878 by Anna Catherine Green, was the first detective novel by an American and the first by a woman in any language. In 1887, Sherlock Holmes appeared, created by Arthur Conan Doyle. An avalanche of mystery fiction followed in England and America. The third decade of the 20th century was called the Golden Age of the detective story. Charlie Chan, Philo Vance, Ellery Queen, and Dashiell Hammett all appeared between 1920 and 1930. From 1841 to 1920, approximately 1,300 new detective titles were published in the English language. From 1920 to 1940, more than 8,000 new titles were published. In 1929, as many books were published as in the preceding 8 years. And of course, Minion's first novel was published this year. From 1931 to 1940, 6,000 titles were published, and 1,100 new writers of detective stories appeared. In 1938, 2 volumes a day were published, so you can see that Minion certainly wrote her mystery stories at the perfect time. Many of her reissued paperbacks from Warner Books describe her as America's Agatha Christie. A quote from the Miami News: "Mignon Eberhart's name on mysteries is like sterling on silver." From the New York Times, her books are absorbing and Class A. Mignon Eberhart has been very successful in her chosen literary field.
While the Patient Slept. In this, Eberhardt's second full-length novel, Sarah Keat was doing private duty, nursing an elderly stroke patient, a Mr. Federer, in his own home. It was a rambling old mansion with towers at each end of the front. One tower was lined with windows on both floors, but the other tower had no windows at all. And on the first floor of this windowless tower was the room in which lay her patient. The mansion, on the whole, was not a cheerful place. This somber background created an appropriate setting for the murky undercurrent flowing throughout the story. Sarah's taxi had slipped off the muddy road en route to the Federer place, and she decided to cut across a thickly wooded field in an effort to shorten her soggy trudge to the house. As she rounded a curve in the shrubbery, she encountered her patient's pretty young granddaughter. March Federer and Sarah introduced themselves and walked together to the mansion. There, Conrad, a large and ferocious German shepherd, allowed Sarah entrance to the house only after a sharp reprimand from March. In the hallway entrance, Sarah was introduced to Grandel, a servant described as dark and swarthy, with glittering eyes under overhanging brows and a wide purple scar running slantwise down across his face. As Grandel led Sarah up to her assigned room, she accidentally stepped on the tail of a large yellow tomcat, inappropriately named Genevieve. The carpets on the stairs and hallway were thick and heavy. The footsteps were lost on them, and apparently the days of Federal prosperity had predated electricity. Halls were lit by candles and rooms by oil lamps. On many rooms, heavy velvet curtains served as doors. Sarah next encountered Eustace Federy, March's cousin, an arrogant young fellow. However, Eustace introduced himself and his house guest, Deke Lonergan. At Sarah's request, Eustace led her past curtained doorways and down dark hallways to the room in which lay her patient. As they entered, Mr. Federy's son, Adolph, rose from the shadows around the bed. After a few cold and sneering exchanges between uncle and nephew, both Adolph and Eustace left the room, but each individually requesting that he be summoned at once should Mr. Federy rouse sufficiently to speak. At dinner, the elaborately dressed family included Adolph's wife, Isabel, heavily loaded with cosmetics and jewelry, and apparently not one bit fond of her husband. During the meal, Sarah came to realize that there was no mutual affection between March and her Uncle Adolph either. Also at the table was Mitty Frisling, a house guest, and Mr. Elihu Dimmock, who was present at the mansion, he explained, to see Mr. Federy about a business matter, and of course, Deke Lonergan. During the meal, Conrad set up an unearthly howl outside, which turned March strangely white and tense. And then Sarah, eerily aware of being watched, turned slightly and noticed the Oriental cook, Kima, staring intently at her from a narrow slot in the door to the butler's pantry. When Sarah returned to her patient's room, she studied the angular stairway that led from one corner of the tower room upward to the second floor. And she noted that among the items on the mantel above the fireplace was a green elephant, a lovely jade curio, slightly larger than her hand. At bedtime, March stopped by the room to check on her grandfather, and in the course of the conversation with Sarah revealed that both she and Eustace had been left without parents for their grandfather to raise. After March departed, a wild storm arose, rattling the window frames and shutters throughout the old house, and setting the evergreens outside to tossing and moaning. With Genevieve the cat settling himself atop the mantel, and with a final check on her patient's pulse, Sarah dozed, and then was awakened sharply by what seemed at first a loud clap of thunder. Further awake, her eyes fell on the velvet curtain at the hall doorway as it wavered back into place. And then she turned and saw Genevieve standing at the foot of the tower stairway. His tail was lashing furiously. His ears were laid back, and his lips were drawn back from his teeth in a soundless snarl. She snatched the lamp, turned up the wick, and took a few steps up the narrow turning stairway. A dark shape sprawled grotesquely just beyond the first angle. When Sarah turned the body to her light, she saw it was Adolph Federy, shot through the heart. The family and the house guests gathered in the tower room. Sarah followed old Kima, the Oriental cook, to the kitchen for boiling water with which to sterilize a hypodermic needle for her patient. While there, the two observed March running breathlessly in from the storm. Sarah noticed Kima and March exchanging a meaningful look as March slipped through the kitchen and into a nearby storage room. But when the police came bounding in, Sarah, somewhat to her own amazement, joined Kima in covering up for March. One of these officers was Lance O'Leary, a detective with whom Sarah had worked to solve a murder at the local hospital a few years previously. O'Leary interrogated each family member and the 2 servants, Kima and Grandel, and all 3 house guests, Mittie Frisling, the daughter of a recently deceased notary public, Mr. Dimmock, the man who was there on business matters, and Deke Lonergan, who shared the room directly overhead with Eustace. And then O'Leary spoke in cold and deliberate tones to the group, informing them that he felt that there was no way that any outsider could have come into a locked house with a man-eating dog guarding the place without being detected. He firmly declared that the murderer was one of them. Well, Grandel, for all his sinister looks, turned out to be a gentle and efficient assistant to Sarah, helping change Mr. Federy's bed and tidying up the room after the departure of the group. And from Grandel, she learned that Mr. Jonas Federy and his wife had had 4 sons. James, March's father, who had died when March was just a child, and Charles, who resembled his younger brother Adolf in many ways besides appearance, both being drifters, spendthrifts, and dependent upon their father for money. Charles being dependent, that is, until he had disappeared during a scandalous episode, and from then on was presumed dead by his family. Adolf, the murdered man, and Eustace, young Eustace's father, who had died of alcohol abuse shortly before his wife died, giving birth to Eustace Jr. Then Sarah asked Grandel about the jade elephant, explaining that she presumed that the startled cat had knocked it off the mantel at the time of the shooting, and that she supposed it had rolled to the foot of the stairs not far from Adolph's body. Grandel answered her by commenting that it was a trinket, seemingly quite dear to Mr. Federy. He picked up the elephant, declared it undamaged, and placed it back up on the mantel. However, when Sarah was relating all this to O'Leary later on, the elephant was missing. Still later, en route to dinner, Sarah lifted the door curtain and noticed a small nail protruding from the doorway casing. Snagged on the nail was a blue thread and 5 or 6 blue beads from the dress that Mittie Frisling had been wearing the previous evening prior to the murder. Sarah recalled the falling of that curtain directly following the sound of the shot. While again at dinner, Conrad barked furiously outdoors, and again, March paled visibly. It was a silent, uncomfortable mealtime, and then all at once, every head jerked as footsteps sounded on the floor above their heads. Both servants were nearby, and the only vacant chair was Adolph's. Well, the men rushed upstairs and discovered no one. Grandel volunteered to sleep on the couch in the tower room that night, and when Sarah returned from her errand to the kitchen for hot water, Grandel was just tucking the jade elephant under the logs in the wood box by the fireplace. So then, sending him on a trumped-up errand to the kitchen, Sarah extracted the elephant and hid it in an old violin case sitting in the far side of the room, because she now realized that the little elephant had some bearing on the mystery surrounding Adolph's murder. On Sarah's 3rd night in the Federy house, another noisy, stormy one, Sarah was again joined by Grandel as he slept on the couch. After her errand to the kitchen, she heard the storm abate, and in the sudden silence detected the sound of creaking floorboards, footsteps, in the room directly overhead, supposedly locked since Adolph's murder. She awakened Grandel, who crept quietly up the angled staircase. But Grandel did not return. Terrified, Sarah stumbled blindly through the dark hallways to the telephone and gasped, "Police, police." The night watchman stationed there in the house discovered her there, and with his flashlight led her back to the tower room, where they found Grundle once again lying on the couch, but dead, strangled with the violin string. After the ensuing interrogation, Kima, for no apparent good reason, volunteered to Sarah that the footsteps overhead had been hers, and Sarah was mystified by this obvious lie. She began to wonder if there might possibly be an intruder or some concealed person in the mansion. As she recalled the dog's furious barking at dinner while all known parties were seated together, and she remembered the looks exchanged now and then between Kima and March, she knew if there were an unknown party involved, it would have to be covered by one or more of the household members totally familiar with the maze-like property. That afternoon, Sarah, without informing the police or O'Leary, ventured to investigate a cluttered trunk room. From that room, a flat-stepped ladder led to the attic, and she steeled herself and ascended those steps. There, frightened by a swooping bat and an enormous spider, she stumbled, clutching at an old piano stool nearby. In its torn plush padding, her fingers encountered the smooth, cold surface of the jade elephant. When Sarah later joined the family for dinner, she had that elephant carefully wrapped in her knitting and kept the wool in her lap during the entire meal. But on her passage through the doorway to her patient's room, the velvet curtain was quickly wound around her head, and the curio was snatched from her knitting. As she attempted to settle her nerves, Lance O'Leary appeared in the room, and in the exchange of the day's events, O'Leary told Sarah that he'd been researching the family in the town, and most of the citizenry scarcely knew of the Fedderies, and they kept no account in the local bank. He had found an old editorial referring to the family name and the mansion. The patient was the son of the leader of a band of highwaymen. The old gentleman lying in the bed had sought respectability and culture, evidently, but the family remained somewhat isolated by his choice. Armed with a number of theories, O'Leary questioned Mittie Frizzling harshly. She revealed that her father had been a member of that gang, and although the Fedderies had kept the bulk of the funds, the old man had provided well for Mittie and her father. After Mr. Frizzling's recent death, Mittie had simply moved into the mansion feeling that the Fedderies owed her. And she had been standing at the curtained doorway, watching as Adolf had crossed quietly to the mantel and toyed with the jade elephant, unscrewing its head and discovering a paper within. And she saw him read it. She saw him replace it back into the elephant, and then with it in his hand start up the stairway. And there an unseen party had shot him. O'Leary decided to spend the night in the tower room himself while Sarah dozed. And responding in the night to a terrified scream, they found Mittie in the upstairs hallway, in hysterics, claiming that she had seen Adolf Feddery standing at the top of the stairway. As dawn approached, Sarah noted that her patient was showing signs of recovery. O'Leary instructed Sarah to inform the family at breakfast that Mr. Feddery would most definitely be able to speak within 24 hours. And the household members hovered near during the day. By late afternoon, Sarah's nerves sought relief, and she asked Kima to stand watch over her patient while she took refuge in the book-lined library. March and Deke, without noticing Sarah, entered, and Sarah heard March hinting to Deke that she felt that she had herself been indirectly responsible for the two murders, but she didn't explain in what way. So following a conversation between Sarah and O'Leary, March was summoned to the tower room, where she admitted that she and Kima had agreed to allow her Uncle Charles, the Federer presumed dead, into the house. She had felt it her family duty to give him a chance to reconcile with his old father, and Kima had been supplying him with food. Charles bore a striking resemblance to Adolf, which had caused Mitty's hysteria. March admitted also that she had held Conrad the night of Adolf's murder, so that Charles could run out and hide in the stable loft. But March seemed genuinely puzzled by the efforts made by unknown persons to keep the green elephant from her, as her grandfather had expressly stated that if and when he should die, March should take immediate possession of it, and why he'd never told her. After March left the room, O'Leary devised a plan to Sarah whereby she should indicate at dinner that she was utterly exhausted and could hardly stay awake much longer. And then around 12:30 a.m., the usual time for her kitchen errand, she was to turn the lamp very low and hide herself in the bed curtains opposite the stairway. He gave her a police whistle to blow if and when a killer might bend over the bed. He pointed it out that it was apparent that Adolf's discovery of the secret contained in the elephant had prompted his murder and also Grandel's. And so, when the old patient could speak again, he would be able to reveal that secret, and thus was now in great danger. O'Leary promised Sarah to be near at hand. A dim shape entered the hall doorway and slipped noiselessly into the deeper shadows behind a large chair, but did not advance. As Sarah strained to keep watch on those shadows, a figure quietly descended the tower stairway. This dark blur continued to move soundlessly toward the bed, and as it was slowly bending, the other shadow flung itself from behind the chair, and the two blended in a violent struggle. With the shriek of Sarah's whistle, a third joined them, and flashlights and lamplights illuminated O'Leary, Charles Federer, and there we have to leave our listeners. But one turn of events that the reader will have no difficulty believing is that after the unraveling of the mystery, Sarah vowed, during her preparations to leave the mansion, that she would hereafter confine the remainder of her nursing assignments to well-lighted hospitals.
I just want to thank Lila and Barbara for giving us such wonderful and interesting information. We hope that encourages you to start or continue reading Minion Eberhart. I just wanted to make a couple brief comments before we open it up for questions, if you have any, for the two women who spoke for us tonight. In the back, we have a list of works of Minion Eberhart. These are her books ranging from 1929 to 1988, so feel free to pick one of those up in the back, and there's a brief description of her on the back as well. Excuse me. On the back there are several volumes of books. Barbara, being the very good librarian that she is, brought up the cert copies of Eberhardt's books that you can find, so if you are so inclined, you can take one with you and check it out downstairs as you leave. Also, we have a few of the Heritage Room copies of Eberhardt's books. We have the original edition of Patient in Room 18 and While the Patient Slept, as well as the current Bison editions back there, plus two others that are under serious consideration for Bison to reprint as well. It's really neat to see the distinction in the way the covers were printed 50 years ago as the way they are now. So if you have any questions, we can open that up to Lila and Barbara, and they can try and answer them the best they can. Thank you for coming.
I did use the vertical file here in the Heritage Room. It's wonderful if any of you want more complete information about her. And they also have, I think, a complete set of her books along the wall over there.
Yes, does either one of you have a special book that you would particularly recommend of hers, or anyone, or just in general?
Someone asked a question if either one of us have a special favorite of her books. Do you have a special favorite of her books?
Yes, Barbara.
Okay.
I have two special favorites. Of course, I like this one, and because I wouldn't quarrel with Scotland Yard's choice, but I like Casa Madrone because it dealt so well with the history of the San Francisco earthquake and the fire that followed, and I liked the Bayou Road. It dealt with the Civil War and a lot of the suffering of the South during the North occupation. It was a very good book.
I have heard that she was very methodical with her research when she was researching some of her history books. Can you elaborate on that for us at all?
Well, yes, not a lot, but the question's been asked that can we elaborate on Minion's very methodical research. It's evident, especially in Casa Madrone, because it even mentions in her book some of the buildings, the St. Francis Hotel, the Call Building, for instance. And of course, she deals with Nob Hill, places where the fire spread to. You know she did her homework, and with the Bayou Road and the Civil War too. It's carefully researched. It's very interesting.
Yes?
Well, she was alive yet, so
Yes.
some of these questions could be asked of her.
Yes. Someone said that she is alive so that some of these questions we could ask her. Yes. She was invited to appear, I think, in the Heritage Room in 1982, was it? But at the last minute, she couldn't come, and they sent her a list of questions. And the dialogue is in the vertical file here at the Heritage Room, and it's very interesting how I think originally she sent a tape with the answers to these questions on the tape, and then they typed her answers. Yes, thank you.